about bikepacking, like this is pretty special. So I'm excited to see all these faces, this curiosity, because I think it's going to get contagious here in Tulsa. There's so many strong cyclists here that want to get out and see and do things. So hopefully we can inspire each other and dream big today and talk about cool stories. So I don't know how much you heard about what I did. I'll go real quick. I've done a lot of bikepacking in the past, and a buddy and I were kind of daydreaming at his birthday party at Heirloom, and he's like, man, you know, like you're talking about doing this big ride called the Tour Divide. Starts in Canada and goes to Mexico, and he's like, some of the really good riders, they ride to the start of that ride. I was like, yeah, whatever. Like he's just one-upping me, like, you know, Eric always does. But like it starts sitting on my mind. Like we all have dreams, right? We're like, well, how far is that? You know, can I ride from Tulsa to Canada and then back? And like I blow it off for another couple of days, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna Google this. And like my mind is getting inspired, and I'm like, well, I got like 2,000 miles of training left to do over the next 2 months for the Tour Divide, right? It starts in June. I'm like, I can probably do this. It's 1,500 miles, you know, per Google. I'm like, okay, let's think about it a couple more nights. And I think this is how dreams get built, right? You're like, something randomly comes into your life, and like all of a sudden you're inspired. So I'm like, just keep asking myself, like, I could do that. Why can't I do that? Other people do it. And I'm like, well, no one's probably ever made a route from Tulsa to Canada. Like, I've never heard of that. So I get on a ride with GPS. I'm like, there's bucket list rides in Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota. And I just start getting inspired by all these little, like, the Divide of Kansas, Flint Hills Divide, the Maudahey Trail in North Dakota, the Black Hills Forest in South Dakota. There's so many cool things along the way that I'm like, okay, I can piggyback this 100-mile section onto this 100-mile section, and this 100-mile section links to there. And I get across Nebraska going this way for 2 or 3 days, and I'm on the Cowboy Trail heading north. So like, I'm like, okay, this is doable. But it had grown to almost 2,500 miles at that point. So I'm like, okay, now what do? Do I stay in Tulsa and commit all my energy to the Tour Divide, which is 2,500 miles into the ride to the Tour Divide? So I doubled the distance I was supposed to do, because the Tour Divide is 2,800 miles from Canada down to Mexico in the Rocky Mountains. So then my buddy Lance, he's like, man, you should really just put all your energy in the Tour Divide. And then, you know, I'm calling Eric and texting him, and I'm like, Eric, I can do this. And he's like, whatever. And then I put it out there to the world. Like, once you do that, you're committed. So Eric's like, well, it wasn't my idea, because in my little Instagram story, I was like, Eric and I came up with this, and it was his idea, and it's like, I can't like not live up to it now. So that's how this crazy idea got, you know, dreamt up, is probably similar to everyone else's crazy ideas. You just randomly come up with an idea, and you can't get it out of your head. And I kept asking myself, why not? And I kept asking that from the perspective of physicality, time, my commitments here to work and friends, whatever I needed to be doing at home. And I had this weird time in my life where I had 4 months roughly to play with no real commitment. So Tiffany, she's sitting here, it's my wife, hi. And I wait like 3 weeks into this process, I'm like, Tiffany, why not? So Tiffany's super supportive, and she's like, of course, from my perspective, I want you to be at home, but like, yeah, why not? It's the biggest adventure of your life, probably. Go do it. So that's, you know, that all happened in about a 2-week time frame. Eric Powell's birthday, hey man, you should do this. These people are awesome. And then all of a sudden, dreamt up the route, didn't know anything about it other than this dot connected to that dot, and boom, gone. So from that was tons of stories, tons of lessons learned, tons of like, just situations you couldn't prepare for because you didn't have time to prepare for them. So all that happened, that ride to Canada, and then I went to Banff, and then I started riding home. That was over 2 months. So to kind of paint a picture of my background, it was 2 weeks away from home. That's a long time. You start getting homesick. You start, you know, like you go on vacation, you're like, wow, this 7 days, it's like, okay, it's time to go home. So I knew there was going to be struggles out there with time and like homesickness and learning new routines and habits. And it really didn't hit until like day 7. And then you keep exploring, you keep pushing through, you keep going and going and going, and all of a sudden it becomes normal again. Those fears and those anxieties, they start just going away. They become secondary. And what was hard starts becoming normal. And I think today, as we talk and tell stories and talk about bike and gear and logistics, I think the biggest takeaway today is if you have an idea, let it fester, cultivate it, think about it, let it build, and then ask yourself, why not? It doesn't matter if it's riding from here to Stroud or here to Canada. Like, do your thing that you can fit in your life that inspires you. And that's what I hope we can get out of today is like dreaming big and then executing those ideas. So what I would like to do is I see the eyeballs looking at me and I see the curiosity and I see like the wonder, and it's kind of familiar right now. Everything's quiet and there's no like true interaction yet. It's reminding me of going through Kansas and Nebraska where I had all these eyeballs, whether they're bison, they're a herd of cows, they might be a deer running off because I spooked up on them. And everything you do when you're out there and you're lonely, you've been out there 2 weeks, is you start looking for interaction. And some of you probably saw my stories. I'll be like, hey, cow, cow, hey, cow, cow, just trying to engage with another thing that's real, that has thought behind its eyes. And it was really fascinating because as you explore yourself mentally and physically, you'll start feeling like the world is vast and you're used to human interaction, but now you're all alone. And where those things come from, your interactions, can be really beautiful because you never really would have a mental conversation with a bison or a herd of cattle. But there's so many subtleties around us when we're moving through time and space slow that you can pick up on like, this cow is like really defensive and posturing up and like looking back at you. And this other cow's like juvenile, like trotting towards you and like being curious. And then you got mama cow and like she's defending her herd. And like you can just have so many small interactions with things when you're moving that slow through space. So today, what I would like to do is find out like y'all's curiosities about my adventures, why you're here, what you're thinking about doing, and how we can dream together and start moving all of us into the bikepacking world of adventure. So I've got tons of stories. We can talk about the time I was the most scared, the most threatened I've ever been in my life. We can talk about like when I was most inspired by nature and listening to a song that just made me randomly cry as a grown-ass adult, like in the middle of nowhere. Just pure inspiration from nature itself, to like the hardships and the physicality and how you get through those, and even something as simple as how do you keep your foot and your chamois clean. Like the logistics of it is just crazy, and it's on its own. So let's make this unlike my experience in Kansas, where I'm like one-way communicating with eyeballs and like really tripping out in my own space, you know, like talking to cattle and bison. And let's just free flow questions, and I can build that into stories and maybe advice with gear that's related to that we're curious about. Yeah.
How did it start? Like, what was your first bikepacking trip, and then how did that, what's the evolution of that to this?
To this? Yeah. I think we're frozen here, but Timmy, you want to try to keep these going? I think you just got to swipe when it gets stuck.
Is that on like a loop?
It is, but there's like 300 photos, so we shouldn't be starting over yet. It all started in 2019. Everyone here probably knows, at the time, Land Run, now Mid-South. Lance had been doing it for a few years, and Tiffany and I got into local cycling, and we went and sagged Lance and the big Tulsa crew at Mid-South, and like, these guys riding gravel 100 miles fast, coming in dirty, and like the party scene, the vibes. That's what got me to actually buy a gravel bike. Then I started like exploring Lyle Wilcox and these bikepacking people on YouTube, getting inspired. And so I buy the bike, we go up to Unbound. Lael's doing a woman's only speech. And I'm like, I'm crushing on Lael already. Like, I know she's a cool person. So I like, Tiffany, we're gonna go to that. Like, I'm gonna sneak in and like listen to Lael. So that's how I really got inspired, was listening to the best, one of the best for sure, bike packers in the world in Emporia, Kansas at the pre-ride to my first 100-mile gravel century. So I think it was that summer, I can't remember exactly, I was like, okay, there's this ride called Mount Evans Hill Climb. It might have been the summer after Lael's speech. And another crazy idea is like, well, I'm gonna ride from Lunar, Kansas, which starts in Emporia. It's a night ride. Do that night ride, wake up the next morning and ride my bike to Colorado, 800 miles away, and along that path do Pikes Peaks and do Mount Evans, which are the two highest paved roads that I think are in North America. And that's where it got started. And I think the biggest thing that I learned right away on that is you better have good communication because everyone is like, oh, I can do what Lael does. I can do what these people do on YouTube. I'm gonna ride 20 hours a day. I'm not gonna sleep but 4 hours a day, and I'm gonna do that back to back to back for 800 miles, 8 days straight. And I go out there day one. It's like record heat like it is this week here, and it's super hot, and it's windy. I'm in the Great Plains heading west from Emporia. I'm digging down. I'm burning hot like I'm doing a 6-hour race. And I get like 6 hours in, and I'm not even close to the 150-mile goal I had that day, right? And here we're going to start talking about goals. Like, you start having goals, you start having ambition, you start having these milestone towns you want to get to. That's going to set me up for sure, and probably everyone else who's new to it, up for failure. Because I'm like, I got to get there. It's getting late. It's getting dark. I'm supposed to already be asleep. I'm digging hard. So I start cramping. I'm like, I still got to keep going. I don't have any electrolytes left on my bike. I'm out of water. I thought I would have been this place, 6 hours ago. The sun's bearing down, and I had my phone on airplane mode. And really all I cared about was getting there and getting to sleep and trying to find food. And while this is going on, Tiffany's at home, and this is new to Tiffany. So as a spectator, your wife, your significant others, they're worried about you too. It's new to them. Like, he hasn't called me in hours. Where is he? I can't see him on the GPS because it's airplane mode. And behind the scenes, Tiffany's reaching out to our friends. Have you heard from him? Do you know where he's at? And it's just a vacuum of nothingness. And I told Tiffany I'd be there by sundown. I didn't get to the lake. The foods were closed. There was no food. The lake was flooded. There was a table like that with a bunch of them stacked all around each other because the lake was just all, ruined everything, and this is their trash pile now. I take this down. I'm so exhausted. I just get on top of that table. I'm like, ugh. And don't still think about Tiffany. And her and Larry, our good friend at the time, was about to hop in the truck and come find me because they thought I was in a ditch, right? I was just tired. I'd cramped out, been riding for 12 hours, only went 100 whatever miles, 120, something like that. And finally you're like, oh, I gotta get in touch with Tiffany. So I do, and it was like, holy cow, you're okay. Of course she was relieved, but I didn't really hear about how upset she was about that till I got home. But that led to this little gadget. I'm sure many of you have seen these things, but this you can communicate almost anywhere in the world. It's a satellite. As long as it can see the sky, it can communicate via text. So no matter where your phone is, you have no reception, whatever, this thing was a Tiffany purchase and a safety purchase to communicate with your loved ones and keep them in the loop, because they probably are more stressed out than you are many times when they don't know what's going on. So I call her. I'm getting dive bombed by mosquitoes. So I took a mosquito net with me because it was summertime. I knew it was going to be mosquitoes. But what you didn't think about, I didn't think about mosquito net, is they have to have air between you and the net, right? So the mosquitoes are just smoking the net and then biting me through the mesh. I'm like, why the hell did I carry this mesh this whole way? And it's useless. So yeah, know your gear and communicate was the main story from that trip. And once you realize that you're not Lael Wilcox, you're humbled very, very quickly. That trip I thought would take 8 days. It took 14 days. And it was kind of embarrassed because I had this grand idea that I could go that far and that hard day after day. And I called Tiffany, I think it was day 2, after I'd not been getting good sleep because it was hot and the mosquitoes. I was like, can I get a hotel? Like, I was ashamed to ask that question because I was so set on the ideas of others and what others thought was fast and what others thought was a good distance per day. So that was very humbling, and I think all of us as new bike packers will find that what you can do day 1 is not what you can do day 3, and it's especially not what you can do day 5. So your true pace as you're exploring your physicality comes on at about day 5. Then you'll know how far and how fast you can go and sustain it. Day 3, you're really getting punched in the gut because your mind overrode your body, and now your body is punching your mind back hard. And if you can come back from day 3 and push through that and make it to day 5, this magical transformation happens where somehow your mind and your body have come to an agreement. And like, it's real. Like, the only way I can describe it, like, you've backed off so hard day 4 because day 3 was so physically exhausting and painful that day 5 you've had a little time to heal and recover and realize you're not Leo Wilcox. And voila, now you're off to your normal pace. So, yeah, I got started. Lance right there inspired me at Land Run. Any other? Yeah.
What kind of training did you lead up to it?
Training, yeah. So training is interesting. I would say that you're never going to feel ready. So no matter what training you do, don't let Training Peaks or Trainer Road or Strava or your friends or someone tell you you're not ready. Do what you can, do as much of it as you can, and be consistent. And just show up. You'll figure out your pace based on the training. But leading into this trip, those familiar like with effort levels, majority of your training is like perceived effort 4 or less. Like, you're just sticking in zone 2, which is 2 out of 5 for the range of zones, and you're doing long Saturday and Sunday rides, 5 hours each, and just building that block time on the weekends, and then during the week, 1 or 2 intensity rides, and then recovery rides. And I noticed the biggest increase in fitness when I did something every single day. Even if it was going to be an off day normally, if I just went for just a walk or just the easiest cruise for 1 hour, that kept the consistency there, that kept everything moving. And I would say that's the most important part of training, is something every day, and then do 2. I can nerd out on this as deep as you want to go. Like, you're trying to get your body used to burning fat at low intensity. It's called basically ketosis. You can't possibly eat enough food in a day. So like, you're trying to eat 300 calories an hour, but to substitute for that, you're burning roughly 500 to 600 calories an hour. So you're trying every weekend on those big 5-hour rides to train your body to eat its fat, which you have tens of thousands of fat calories on you. So that's where that energy comes from on these big, long 15-hour days, is mainly from your fat stores while you're just keeping it going with 300 calories an hour on your bike. So I think I trained from January to the time I left. I had roughly 3,500 miles total training. I don't know how many hours that was, but it was roughly 10 to 15 hours a week, some bigger. And then within that, I did a couple big rides like Ozark Gravel Doom, the 400-mile big adventure in the big hills over there, to test the gear, test my stamina, get a good 4-day hit, and just a couple things like that to build confidence mixed in. But yeah, with training, it's a tricky thing. Like, I have trouble, like, so many people tell you, you have to do this training, you have to be this fit, you have to be this body weight, you have to be like so many watts per kilo power to weight ratio. It's like, man, just show up. Like, if you're inspired, don't worry about getting to the end. If you've got 7 days to do something, just go ride 7 days and get where you get. Grab a U-Haul and ride home, or call a friend and ride home. To me, it's like, train as much as you can and just show up and see what you got. And I really think that goes a long way. Oh, yeah. Good story, babe. Yes. So I tried the Tour Divide 2 years prior to this ride, and they don't tell you when you watch these videos what it's really all about. They glamorize it. They put like everything smells great, and it's a meadow of roses everywhere you go, right? So the race organizer, day one, has this pass called Cocoa Claims. It deviates from a perfectly beautiful gravel road like that and goes up a 4,000-foot climb, all mountain scree. Just picture boulders like you would be hiking on a hiking trail. This is not a cycling trail at all. This bike weighs roughly 60 pounds dry, and that's a 2-day stretch, so I probably had 15 pounds of food and water on that bike. And you get to this pass, and you're like, what is going on? I trained for riding my bike. I'm here to cycle, right? This is a race, a bikepacking race. And you just look up, and you're between this canyon and this canyon wall, and all this scree has just fell into the valley. And it's boulders like as big as your head. So like you're stepping on them like this, and you're stepping on them like this, and the pitch is almost 20% grade. So you're pushing this bike with the handlebars at your eye level. That's how steep it is that you push. And then every step, you're loading this calf just full force, and then pushing and grabbing brake, taking 2 steps, and doing that for 4 hours straight. And that's mixed in amongst snowpack that you had to walk on to get there. So you're still up in Canada, and there's snow everywhere because it hasn't melted yet, even though it's the middle of June. And all these riders that went before you only pushed their bike on the right-hand side of their body. And then they've stepped and made footprints for you, which is you think is good, but your ankle, every time you step in, it goes like this, over and over and over again for miles upon miles. Even if it's flat or downhill, you can't really ride in this snow. And ultimately, I found out after the fact that the number one thing that takes people out of the Tour Divide mountain bike race is their Achilles heel. And that's from all the hike-a-bike and the strain on basically the first week. You have the snow, you have Cocoa Claims, you have this other pass called the Wall. There's my friends I was having those conversations with. And it got so painful that I made it 800 miles into that ride and had to stop from Achilles, whatever it's called, inflammation, itis, and let it heal for 2 days. And the pain was so intense that there was a Taco Bell right there, right across the street, just like that business across the street. I couldn't bring myself to walk that Taco Bell. I Uber Eats'd it to my hotel. So let it heal for 2 days. I go over another pass, another ATV trail, big boulders, another storm come through, it was muddy, it's hike-a-bike, another 4 hours of walking, made it worse. Got to the last town, and it was so bad, like the act of sitting, your ankle flexes. You couldn't do that, you couldn't sit. So now I'm crawling to the bathroom, I'm crawling to bed.
Are you thinking you're done?
I was done. That's when I quit. So that took me out 2 years ago, and that's what inspired what Tiffany brought up, is training your ankles for hike-a-bike, like strengthen and stretching those ligaments in there that aren't used to that angle and that motion. So definitely, it's not needed for all touring rides, and there are bypasses to those sections if you're not doing the race course of the Tour Divide. But the race organizer put that stuff in to literally, I guess these are his words that other people conveyed to me, to do a rite of passage. He wanted to have an element of mountaineering on the ride to weed people out early on during the race. So those are little sneaky sections. There's about 4 of those on the Tour Divide. There's some in New Mexico, and there's one in Colorado on Boris Pass by Breckenridge. It's all mountain bike trail. And with a bike like that, you can mountain bike it. You're taking a risk. We were talking about broken gear earlier. So just like you can break your ankles, like if you're going to start riding on the real bumpy stuff, be careful with your gear. It's a risk versus reward thing in there. So yeah, that's definitely a big part of the training, is work in some hill climbing, find our biggest hills and push this bike up it. Yep. Yeah.
I like riding in the Bohusk area, and I love the shots you have that, and also around the Moria area. I thought in the past you could make it up there looking, on like one of
Yes. We have, all the places I've ridden, I would say,
I was surprised about how many shots I saw of you, and I was like, damn, did he put together this whole thing and not be on the road? Amazing.
that was absolutely the goal. As much back roads, no pavement as I could find, I made that. I can't take all the credit for it. I found every state's bucket list ride, and there's a guy in Kansas that made the Flint Hills Divide. He picked every hill and the highest peak along the route in Kansas and made the path from the southern state line to the northern state line. So my path mimicked that almost exactly. And so all I had to do was basically look at the Osage Passage XL route and link that into the Kansas Divide. So that was the strategy behind course making, which is an art in itself, is look at the heat maps, find other epic rides that have a couple of reviews here and there, and you can probably trust them pretty well. That did get me in trouble in North Dakota. Make sure I come back to that story. But I would say we are very privileged here in Oklahoma. Out of all the states on this journey, we have some of the best gravel roads to ride on, train on, and be 100% exposed to like native, untouched environments. So like two of my favorite sections were, leaving home straight from my front door, and just north of Emporia is just magnificent, beautiful, wide open prairies along that divide route. So if you want to ride to Kansas from here, absolutely use that route. Take a look at day 1 and day 2, and it's awesome. One of my best memories too is like, does everyone remember when the Northern Lights like randomly were visible here? I left that week and didn't know they were coming. I feel like we know a lot about space, right? We know when there's going to be like a meteor near us that we can see, or this random satellite thing we can see, or whatever it is. Like I heard nothing about this. And I'm doing that day 1 thing where I have this ambition to getting 100+ miles in and doing what I do that I shouldn't do, but I know it's going to catch up to me later. And I'm riding deep into the night, and I'm like getting real tired, and like things start coming and going when you get that tired, right? You're 15 hours in, and you're ready to stop, but you're getting to this mark, like whatever it is. And I'm looking up at the sky, and I see like, what is that? What are all these red colors? Like, it was just tones of red, like confusing me. Like this was my process of thinking this. Like, well, I see the wind turbines over there have the big blinky flashy things. I was like, maybe one of those is like malfunctioning and doing like this big broadcast of red light into the atmosphere. Like, I had no idea where it was coming from and really didn't embrace it that much because I didn't know what it was. And I don't know if you saw the very first picture on here of the sleeping bag. I was actually sleeping under those lights, but I was so exhausted I just passed out like that and didn't see them. Didn't even acknowledge them. So I'm talking to Tiffany, and people are texting me in F morning, like, oh, dude, did you see the lights? I'm like, oh, duh, that's what that was. So the next night, I don't know if you saw the other picture of the tent, there was a big cell tower, and I purposely stopped there on top of this 360-degree view so I could see them. But unfortunately, there was a town so many miles away that was light polluting the sky, and I couldn't see them. But it was pretty epic to think back on what I was experiencing when I thought I was just tripping and hallucinating, like oh, this windmill's really bright. So.
Do you think you were gaining, or I'm not sure how you did it, but when you were doing your training for the ride, do you think there is an advantage or disadvantage of riding the training rides fully weighted and fully set up? Or did you think you didn't need that, or is that how you did it?
I don't like to train actually on my gravel bike. Please don't shoot me. So like, I like speed, I like fast, I like adrenaline, I like covering ground, at bike speeds. So most of my training at home is I make sure my road bike is exactly the distance from my pedal to my seat, the exact same seat, and almost the exact same hand angles and back angle. And that's what I do most of my miles on because I want to go ride with my buddies, right? Like, most of them are roadies. They don't like riding their gravel bike all the time, and I like socializing. So if you like that, get your road bike, exactly to your setup here. And the most important is the crank distance to your seat, and then whatever angle you're gonna have your back at. And ideally, this position in your hoods and your elbow angle and your TT angle are exactly the same through your back. And I think you can do cross training that way if it's dialed. And I think that's why it translates for me onto the gravel bike so quickly, is just the mechanics are the same. But absolutely, where I get my setup training is those 3-day adventure rides. Do several of those as you're building up, like even just put it on your bike, ride it around the block, come home, set up your tent, and put it back on your bike. And then as you do the bigger adventure rides, you'll be used to where everything is. Like the routine is the same. This is the stuff I use at the end of the night. This is the stuff I use during the day. This is where I have all my emergency stuff and repair kits. And then there's plenty of extra space here to expand this and put 2 days worth of food and water, in addition to all the other nooks and crannies. And then that's your sleep kit. So familiarize yourself before the multi-day ride by doing a couple local 3-day rides to figure out your 3-day pace, getting used to being tired and setting your stuff up, getting used to being cold in the morning and putting it away. All those little tricks just come from doing. And I wouldn't train on it like that every day, but I would do, leading up to this, I did Gravel Doom, did a couple other smaller adventures, 2 or 3 multi-day rides. Really get familiar with it. It's just repetitive motion. That's what you're trying to get to. When you're 15 hours in on day 4, you don't want to be thinking about how to pack this up in under 15 minutes. Like you could, if you're not familiar with it, you can spend an hour easy fiddling, and that's what I did on that first trip to Kansas. Like I would spend 2 hours a day setting up and tearing down. Like you're just burning daylight. It's getting hot or it's getting cold, whatever's happening. So I guess to paint a vivid picture of that, like when it's cold and you're wet, like you're totally trying to get in your sleeping bag as quickly as possible. And like if it only takes 15 minutes, if you're damp and you stop spinning your legs and you're calorie depleted and you're just waxed, your body will start just shivering from sheer depletion. And it's really, really hard to come back from that shiver mode. The best trick I have there is immediately grab your puffy jacket. As soon as you stop riding, you're still hot. You might even be like borderline glazy still with sweat. Put your puffy on, cover your head, and get that heat that you're still off-gassing into that coat. And that way, when you're exhausted and you're fumbling around, you can get that tent up and get in it before you're shivering and fighting all night to stop shivering. And if you're shivering, you're not going to get to sleep, and then that makes your next day just go on forever. So cold for me is my nemesis. That's for sure cold.
So what's the weight on your setup here?
It's probably, I don't like the idea of knowing exactly what it is because it would get in my head mentally. So I would guess in that, there's no food or water on that right now. It's probably 60 pounds. And then some of your stents could be almost 48 hours. So when you're talking about that, you're going to use about 10,000 calories in 2 days. So that food gets heavy and it gets big. So, you put 6 liters of water on there, that's 12 pounds by itself. So you could be up 75 pounds easy. And that bike right there is set up in, I would call that heavy mode for me. I could take about 7 pounds of gear off that bike to do like a race instead of a tour and still have backups for staying warm and stuff. There's other people that literally will take nothing and rely on movement to keep themselves warm. And that's just a little too risky for me. I guess I can go into why that's too risky for me. The first year of the Tour Divide, it was an abnormal year. This was in 2022. And the Tour Divide usually always has snow on it. You're up so far north, you're up high in elevation, and some of the passes are just so tree heavy, and they're on the cold side of the mountain, right? They just don't get enough thermal energy to get rid of the snow, even though it's dead middle of summer. And that year we started, and we had a late snowstorm come in that hit everyone on day 3 and 4. again, the hardest days you're going to be out there because you've burned yourself up the first 2 days. You're calorie depleted, you're sleep depleted, you're behind on your distance goals, like everything's mentally backwards, right? And the snowstorm comes in, and it sounds dramatic when I say snowstorm, but 8 inches of snow was the total accumulation. And I made a decision to try to get ahead of it based on the forecast. I spent half a day thinking I was just going to wait it out. Then I got bored. I left the hotel that I had already booked for one more night and made a conscious decision to leave that hotel at 9 p.m. and go into the teeth of this storm thinking I could get over the 2 passes before it dumped the snow. So again, you have ambitions, and then Mother Nature comes in and just slaps you hard, it's like, no, we're going to drop the snow 500 feet lower on the mountain than the forecast said it was going to happen. And that doesn't sound like a lot because the mountain's like a 3,000-foot climb. But that 500 foot of extra snow coming down the mountain meant I had to walk for 6 miles in fresh snow on top of old snow. And that 100-mile day turned into 20 hours, and 10 hours of that was pushing a bike through fresh snowpack. And we're from Oklahoma. We don't even really get stints all winter that are that cold and that wet, and that perfect kind of snow transition from, we've all made snowmen before, the real wet, heavy snow that packs real hard and turns to ice, but if it lands on your shoulder, it almost dries instantly. So it wasn't the puffy, nice, fluffy snow. And I'm walking for 10 hours. No one else is out there because they're all smart. They either got through there first or they stayed in the sold-out hotel. That morning, or that evening, I actually gave my extra room, the extra night of my room, to a guy even that was dirty because he was not going to ride through that. I'm like, oh, I'm tough. I'll go. And 10 hours in, I've got all my gear, right? So I got this really nice Gore jacket. I've got this really nice wool undershirt. I got this really nice wool extra undershirt. I've got this mid layer that's wool, like all the right stuff you think you're supposed to do. Multiple layers, backup layers, and waterproof stuff. It just keeps coming for 10 hours, drip, drip, drip. And then I'm pushing fresh tracks. I'm sweating from the inside out, wetting myself liters at a time from the inside of my shirt underneath the Gore. And then the Gore's wet on the top so it can't get that moisture out. And this was the critical mistake that hopefully everyone will remember, because I fixed it this year. We had another snowstorm come through, and the new strategy worked. When your first layer gets wet, just embrace it and do not put the new layer on that's dry. Stay wet, stay soggy with your thinnest layer, and use movement to stay warm. That way, you're not building up layer upon layer. You know how heavy a shirt is when it's soaked with water or sweat? I had all 4 layers on. I probably had, I would guess, 20 pounds of moisture in 4 layers of wool. I was just bear down with that, pushing through fresh snow. And then I got to a point where I was out of layers. I couldn't stay warm anymore. Everything's wet. And I'm at the point now where I'm exhausted. I should be stopping, but I knew if I stopped, the only thing I had left was my sleeping bag. And I wouldn't have a way to dry that stuff because it was still coming down with more and more moisture. And at that point, 2 dudes that camped on the first pass waited for the snow to taper off. They came out and caught up to me because I was snow blazing. I mean, every step was just like this on flat ground. They were walking in the blazed trail for hours and finally caught up to me. And I was like, oh, thank God, people. If I get too cold, there's people here to help. And now I don't have to blaze the snow. But once I stopped blazing the snow, I wasn't working as hard. And that cold crept deep into me. And just, you're walking, you're producing all this energy, but you're still just shaking. Okay, I'm like, if I stop, all I can do is get in my thing and wait for the sun to come out and dry my clothes. And that wasn't going to happen for 2 more days. So I was like, I have to keep going. At this point, I was still 10 miles from the hotel. And I look over at this guy, Gary, from New Mexico, former presidential candidate, super badass endurance guy, done Mount Everest, had frostbite. I'm like, Gary, you cold? He's like, yeah, I'm pretty cold. And he qualified that with I had frostbite on Mount Everest. So I knew I wasn't just being a wanker. This was real. And I keep going, and then this magical trail angel showed up 6 miles into this hike, 10 hours later, and had hot ciders on the side of the trail, and they used their 4x4 to come up the backside and give us 4 idiots cider. And they're like, can't believe you're doing this, and apparently there was one other person still coming. But while all this was going on, the search and rescue out of Fernie had done 10% of the field air flight, helicopter lifts out from hypothermia. So behind us, one mountain pass behind, while we were all shivering, there was another group of people that actually got caught out before the town that had the hotel in that I voluntarily left and couldn't get there and had to be rescued. And I think it was all from the same thing. Multiple layers of clothes failure, calorie depletion, and not understanding how to stay warm in extreme cold and wet. We had the exact same storm come through at the exact same time on the exact same mountain passes this year, and I'd done tons and tons of research on how to stay warm. And 2 things, I think this is probably the best takeaway if anyone's going to ride in cold climate, is the most baller raincoat you can buy that has pit sips, and that's what makes it baller, is this little thing right here. When it's full in like Batman mode, like you can see through it everywhere. The other one does it, the arm does it on both arms, and that's how you evacuate the moisture when you're wetting it out from the inside, and that's the key. If you're cold and you just bundle up, you off-gas all this moisture and it gets up in your gear, and that's what makes you cold is the moisture. So literally be naked underneath this thing, let it sweat out, use your momentum of energy to keep you warm, and then when you start slowing down, not making that moisture, put those dry layers on that you saved for when you stopped moving. And that, to me, worked perfect this year. Probably rode in 30 hours of 40-degree or less rain and fresh snow, and never once shivered. I had myself perfectly temperature regulated just by properly managing the moisture. And then I wasn't carrying all that extra weight that I soaked myself with. So moving was way easier. You'll love this. It's way down in here, but it's so comical as we're digging out. Everyone thinks more is better, right? Less is more, as long as you're moving. So these guys are like straight up industrial style dishwasher, slightly lined, but hardly any insulation there at all. This is more just for comfort. And put your thinnest layer glove, that's natural, like wool or something, in here, and it turns it into a wetsuit. So I don't know if there's any Ironmen in here, but if you ever swam in a wetsuit, you're actually warming the water with your body heat inside the membrane, and then that's what keeps you warm. So get this. This is like an extra, extra large, and there's tons of room in here. So fit your glove in there. You're going to get wet on the inside, and then once it warms up with your body heat, this is what keeps you warm. I have the really nice insulated Gore gloves that work perfectly when it's dry, that work perfectly when you're not sweating from your hands into the gloves. But as soon as that moisture gets into those synthetic, like fancy gloves, I don't know if I have them, like, here's again another perfect example of a hybrid of this. This was $5 at a gas station. It's the best glove I ever wore. I messed up my really expensive gloves from biking so hard I blew the fingertips out, so they weren't waterproof anymore. And I was desperate for not this, but something hybrid in between. And they're kind of the same membrane in the palm, but wicked on the top. And these two together, you see how thin it is, this in there, primo. $15. But the other stuff works. I don't use this unless it's wet. The good, like, long finger gloves like that, they're perfect when it's dry. But if you're in the extreme multi-days in a row, you just have to embrace the wet. You're not going to keep your feet dry. You're not going to keep your hands dry. And the best thing for your feet is a plastic sack. So you're creating that wetsuit again on your socks. So super thin socks. Put the bag between your shoe and your sock. It's like 10 degrees warmer, like that.
Yeah, I'd be curious, like, what was your scariest moment? moment on this trip, or maybe just in general, and like what was the most peaceful moment, the polar opposite?
Yeah. The scariest moment, you would think, like, there's bears, there's mountain lions. Nature itself is very scary. You know, thunderstorms, those are very intimidating in the Great Plains. But those things are expected, something you're prepared for. There is something pretty special about experiencing a thunderstorm, though, when you're the tallest thing around. So, like, just imagine the clashes are just so much more violent, the light so much more brighter, and you're desperate to find something bigger than you. That's scary from a Mother Nature's perspective. But I would say the most memorable story and experience I've had on any of these was actually from humans. I was leaving, so I'll try to set the scene. It's quite the story, so bear with me. I'm roughly 800 miles in. I've been going from farm town, old historic railroad lines, you know, town after town after town, and just beautiful towns, real nice people, what you'd expect, farmers, and, you know, big ag towns that have kind of now been taken over and deteriorating a little bit, but completely safe. The environment's nice and clean. And everyone's curious, or maybe like, what's this guy doing on a bike in our town? Like, they're not used to seeing that, but welcoming always, how can we help, that kind of thing. So I've been embracing this for days, 800, maybe 1,000 miles at this point, and I've went up and across Nebraska, and I'm about to enter South Dakota. And the terrain changes like this as soon as I get to the state line. It went from perfect farmland to Pine Ridge. And some of you may already know where this is going if you're familiar with Pine Ridge. I get into this beautiful pine-laden, like, ravines going in and out, rolling, and it's beautiful, and like the sun's starting to set, and I've got like 30 miles to go to town, so I know I'm going to get there around 10 o'clock at night. And I come up over this ridge, I see 3 elk for the first time. Like, they saw me, and they're just trotting away as I roll over the cattle guard. And I'm like, man, this is one of the most beautiful nights I've had so far on this whole trip. And I just come off 2 days of rest because I had sliced the sidewall of my original rear tire. So I was like really happy, full of food, full of energy, full of sleep, just rocking and rolling. About 90 miles into the ride, I get to my predetermined rest stop, just feeling great, like, yeah, I made it here almost how I thought I would, on time, and ready to get some food and go sleep at the softball fields. So like, that's like a really cool place to sleep, by the way, is a dugout of a baseball or softball field. Like, you got a shelf, you put your stuff, you got a nice flat concrete pad, like everything's really nice, everything's mowed. So, like, I already have my plan, right? I'm gonna go to the gas station, I already knew the grocery store was closed. I'm gonna get my junk food dinner, junk food breakfast, junk food for the next 90 miles to Hot Springs, a couple things of chocolate milk, and be on my way. Like, that's a 20-minute experience, right? And I come over this hill after I leave the pine forest, and it starts flattening out again. Like, the terrain starts getting flat. And I see these lights from a distance, like, oh, those look pretty intense. I'm rolling up on it, I'm like, oh, this is a penitentiary. Like, oh, this is a juvenile detention center. Like, that's not a good first impression. Like, the dominant scene of the town is like holding cells. And I keep rolling, I get to the highway that's gonna lead into the town. I see all these people, like 2 at a time, walking down this highway. And it's cold, like 40 degrees-ish. Everyone's bundled up in sleeves and hoods. Oh, that's that hike I was telling you about, the scree. That's Coco Claims. And the fresh snow and the storm. So I keep going, and I get to the gas station. It's the first thing you get to in town, like everything else is closed. And I see all these people just lingering. I'm like, oh, wow, it's 10:30 at night on like a Tuesday. Like, what's going on here? Small town, like 20,000 people. And the first guy comes around the corner as I'm coming up to go to the front of the gas station. He's like, hey, man, what's up? And he's on his bike, right? Like, it's way up in my space. So I was like, oh, like, I haven't experienced that in a while. And he's like, you want to come stay at my place? I got this, like, he's all like this, right? Like, energized, but weird. And I'm like, I mean, that's cool. Like, I'm just passing through. Like, cool. I was like, what do you got here? Like, just trying to make conversation and move on, right? Because he was like, that was mine. And he was like, yeah, man, you sure you didn't want to stay? Like, he's like trying to honeypot me, right? Like, probably looking at my bike and like, come stay in this warm place. It's cold. Like, come on, come on. Like, I was like, this is weird. Like, this is too aggressive. Yeah, like you get really actually genuine camaraderie all along the route, but this was abnormal. Like, seemed like a little too ambitious for honesty. So I go around the corner and I set my bike just like this against the wall. And this is normal routine, right? You go near the door, you set it against the wall, and you start looking like, oh, I have this much food left, I have that much water left, and like, okay, that's empty too. You're counting your calories because I got to sleep outside and eat dinner. I got to wake up in the morning and eat breakfast, and I got to ride 80 miles in the morning after I do that. So that's one of those 10,000 calorie loads. And you know, you're opening all your stuff, and these two people come up, and like I'm already on high alert, right? Because there's all these random people like just looking like deadpan, like glassed over eyes and stuff. So I'm like on high alert, like afraid to leave my bike here. It's the first time the whole trip I was worried about my bike getting took. And I don't take a lock because we're all weight weenies, right? Like locks are heavy. I'm like, where am I going to put it? So that moment in time, I was like, should have brought a lock. But I'm opening my stuff, and like two people come up, like, hey man, what are you doing? And his wife's like, hey, did you go out to Crazy Horse? And they're all like tweaking, like moving around like this. And like, again, no concept of like space, like right up in my shoulder space. And I'm like, yeah, it's, you know, I'm passing through. Like, where you going? I'm like, well, I'm heading north. I was like, oh, you going up to, he knew where I was going. Like, he's from there. So I'm like, man, I got to be careful what I say. And they keep breaking me down, like trying to be interested. And like, I'm just like, man, get out of my face. Like, you're wasted. And he's like, can you buy me dinner? And then she's like, can you buy me dinner? I'm like, there's 10 other people around here. If I create a scene, like I'm going to like get a lot of attention at that point. But I already noticed, just like everyone's looking at me right now, from afar, all these random people are curious about me. I've got this freaking cotton candy bike. I'm in Pine Ridge, which is like a really, really, apparently I learned this when I got home, the most impoverished place in America. Average income is $4,000 a household per year. 70% incarceration rate for the men. I forget the drug addiction. It's like most of their population. Pine Ridge, South Dakota. It's a reservation. And this is nothing about reservations. If I went to Boston or South Chicago, I've experienced some of this there. And I just happened to roll up in this town. I built this course myself. This is one of those connector sections between known routes, and I didn't do my homework. I had no idea I was entering one of the hardest places on the planet as far as murders, drugs, and poverty. And I'm naive. Like, before I left home, Tiffany's like, hey, how many reservations are you going to be on? And I just like, why should she ask me that? Like, a few. Like, I knew I was going to be on a few, but I thought the TV stuff I saw 10 years ago when I was, you know, casually watching Nightline or something, I just thought that was them sensationalizing the drama of some of these cities. So I was naive, and I go in there, and I'm like marked. From the very first conversation, I think, with that guy on the bike, he's like, knew I could provide him something. Whatever he wanted from me, I don't know what it was, but he definitely wanted me in his world. And then those two people were trying to get dinner out of me. So I'm like, how do I handle this situation? I was like, I can't cause a scene. These guys are wasted. She's already telling me about Crazy Horse, who's like one of the most badass Native Americans on the planet that actually beat up the white generals, right? So like she's subtly saying, I can kick your ass, white boy, on the res. And I'm like, how the hell do I handle this? So I'm like, yeah, I can buy you dinner, but I don't want everyone else that's there waiting for dinner to like also want dinner. So I'm like, go in, like quietly pick some stuff out and meet me at the counter. And that's for their own, like, let them feel empowered, and I'm not buying them dinner and that kind of stuff. So I get through that, and I'm in there just scooping up like 10,000 calories worth of food, and some of these people probably ain't seen 10,000 calories in a month. So like I'm like getting eyeballed just by how many bags of crap I'm carrying out to put on the bike. And I buy their food, they go on their way, they're across the way now, there was a restaurant in there that had closed, so there's some tables they were eating their dinner at. I was like, okay, I handled that well. They're content, I'm moving on. Now I'm by myself again, putting all this food on my bike, and that takes a while, right? Another pro tip is when you're being a weight weenie at home and you're packing all your stuff and you're like, sweet, I fit it all on there. There's not an ounce of room to spare, it's perfect. You got to remember, you're going to do 2-day stints and need 2 bags full of food on your bike when you do that. So this whole thing, you see all this extra room? That's for food, those 2-day runs. So that's a tip, to be able to get in and out of there quick and not have like a backpack on your back that you got to haul for a long time till you eat it and consume what's on your back, right? That sucks. Don't do that. So the next person comes up. It's like, hey, what's going on? Where are you going? And this person's not as out of their mind, but still in some way intoxicated. And he's buttering me up. I see it coming this time. And he's like, can you buy me some dinner? It's like 5 minutes into me stuffing stuff on my bike. I'm like, how do I handle this? So I'm like, man, I just bought that couple over there dinner. I'm out of money. And that is key. You're in the most impoverished gangster area, dealing going on. It's a dry county. Everyone was drunk, so this is where they're probably getting their bootleg alcohol. And I'm like, I'm out of money. I just bought that couple over their food. I wish I could, but I gotta move on. So I'm letting them know I'm out of money. That I don't like telling lies, but that was a hardcore lie. Another tip is don't put all your money in one place. Emergency money back here, like where you keep your spare tube. Different money here, and hidden money up here is another layer. That way, if you're in this, you can okay, here's a handout, I'm out. They can see the vessel is empty. So keep these with a little bit of cash. Hide your real emergency cash somewhere else that they can't ever see if you're doing handouts. So I get that person on. Once I say, no, I'm out of money, off to the next person. They're hustling, right? And the third guy comes out, and while he's talking to me, this other guy walks out the door to his lifted pickup truck, which must be there's no money in this town, so he must be the person maybe doing some shady stuff. Everyone at this point is a suspect to me. And
Well, they asked you if you were packing too.
well, I'm getting there. So this guy walks out. He's big, and I don't know that I've never ever perceived this. Native American men, they're genuinely broad-shouldered, tall individuals, and everyone around me was bigger than me. I stand 6 foot roughly with shoes on and 220 pounds. Right? I'm not normally threatened. The men that were around me, and at this point, there's probably 10 or 15 people all in this parking lot doing not stuff they should be doing while drunk in public and stuff. And I feel physically threatened for the first time ever in my life. That never happens because I'm just generally confident with my abilities, and I'm a bigger dude, so I don't have to usually worry about that. And I'm like, even if these guys, if I piss one of them off, and they're probably big enough to take me, and then their buddies are going to come over and back them up, right? So I'm like, I got to dance here really easy. While I'm thinking all this guy comes out the door, and I'm again right here by the door. This is the door, and as he's walking by, and I'm stuffing stuff, look at this white boy on the res. And I kid you not, it was just that loud. And again, I feel all these eyeballs coming at me. So, at this point, it's been 10 minutes, me stuffing stuff. I've almost got it packed in. And the last guy that comes up, he's trying to butter me up. But this time, he was much more direct. He says, do you have a gun? And since I've watched that documentary, apparently, the 12-year-olds on this res are packing guns at night. It's this is how hardcore this reservation is that everyone has a weapon. In this documentary, there's a girl, it's a former gang associate, carrying around a machete, and she says she's used it, right? So now I start deploying those tactics as I've slowly warmed up to what's happening here. I'm like, yeah, I've got protection. I don't carry a gun. At that point, I had this. Here's my gun. I kind of wanted to whip it out and show him, but don't mess with me, bro. It's a pocket, hand mace that you use on a trail, right? So it's for dogs, all right? If I get a real aggressive dog, and I didn't have the bear spray. That's what that is at the time. So yeah, I've got protection, absolutely. As soon as I say that, he walks off. So at that point, I was like, I can go look at these softball fields, but I already had a vibe. I got to get the hell out of here. I started looking at my phone. There's not a hotel anywhere near this place. I'd either have to double back 80 miles or go forward 80 miles. So that was the easy choice. And I was like, well, I'm going to look at the dugout. So I'm riding, it's out of school. It's maybe a mile from this gas station. And on the way, there's neighborhood stop signs. And all these cars are they don't acknowledge that stop sign. They're accelerating through the stop signs, not even hitting their brakes. This is too sketch. I get to the school, the barbed wire's going up and out, away from the school, as if to keep people out of the school. And right across the street from that was a dugout. And I was like, that spot's already taken. There's someone probably already sleeping in there. Didn't even roll in there. And that was the 190-mile night. So normally I rode about 95 miles a day, the days I rode. That usually took about 10 miles per hour, including your food and stop time during the day. You're lucky to cover about 8 to 10, maybe 12 miles an hour with all your stop time. So I rode from that morning roughly at sunrise. I don't know if you saw the tractor picture yet, but there's a tractor at sunrise. That was that morning. Got on the res at 10:30 at night, left the res. I was in Hot Springs, one of the most beautiful cities I was in the whole trip, another 90 miles later at sunrise. So that was a sunrise to sunrise day, 190 miles. Only planned to do 90. And probably had I not had that flat that left me rest before all this happened for 2 nights, 2 full nights of rest, waiting for FedEx, I wouldn't have had the energy to do that. So that would have been very unique situation because I was looking for places to stop and sleep along the route, and that made me realize these little signages that were along the highway the whole way. And at this point I had gravel roads the whole way on the res. I was like, hell no. Because like leaving town, it was just mobile home and chained up dog, junk, abandoned building, mobile home, chained up dog. It's like I cannot go on the res, and the only people awake still are people up to no good. And so I was like, I got to get out of here. I finally got into the farmland, and I noticed all these signs, and it was so sad. It said, "Don't be stupid, don't die." It was literally that direct. This is everywhere someone had died from drunk driving on that highway. And I was like, these are randomly placed, and it finally dawned on me, this is everywhere someone had died. So I was like, I can't even just bandit camp in a ditch because I'm at risk of a car coming off the ditch and finding me while I'm sleeping. And then I kept noticing mobile homes up on the hills. I was like, I can't go hide out in the bush, hop a fence and hide because there's too many places somebody could see me, and I felt too threatened at that point. So don't let that scare you. I would expect it. I've ridden roughly 6,000 miles of off-road stuff, a lot of it I have been shot at before, but nothing that scary. And that being shot at experience actually helped me probably get through the res. I had made a mistake. I rode from Tulsa to Bentonville via Kansas, Missouri, and down. And that was one of my training rides. And it was kind of the same experience. Just after sunset, there's 3 dogs on the road. They're coming at me hard. I put myself between my bike and the dogs. They've been coming at me for about 5 minutes. I'm trying to get past their territory. And I've got that light. I don't know if anyone's used these big lights, but I have my headlight on. It's the biggest, brightest mountain bike torch you've probably ever seen. And I've got like these dogs chasing me. My helmet's going like this, but the whole time it's pointed at this rundown house. And it's after dark. I'm on a road that never has cyclists on it. And I'm hollering full throat, like, rah, like going at these dogs. I probably scared the crap out of these homeowners. Just in the middle of nowhere. And it was like a junkyard front yard. So it's like, these people have guns. These dogs are there to protect their stuff. And it's like, these dogs should be there and they're doing their job. But I'm coming at their dogs hard. I finally get past their property, and that's the tricks with dogs. They're territorial. Get past their protection zone, and then they'll leave you alone. So you got to keep moving slowly, whatever you got to do. Get off their turf. And I'm probably a football field and a half away from that front porch. I hear 3 shots, bang, bang, bang. I'm sure they are warning shots, but boy, did I get as small as I can as I'm riding away. Like, this is scarier than the dogs. And then, of course, the next set of car lights I saw, I was like, it was miles and miles down the road, but I was like, I sure hope it's not those homeowners. So don't let this scare you. It was the most memorable experience, probably because it hardly ever happens, and I was not expecting it. And out of 6,000 miles of doing this, it's the only 2 experiences I've had that are that memorable. People are genuinely curious. They'll be puffer fishing at you at first, like, why are you here? What are you up to? As soon as you say you're embracing the land and seeing your home at a slow pace, they're curious. So diffuse it with courtesy, and you usually get through it.
So the ride to Kansas and the whole ride, what was the total mileage on it?
The ride from here to
Ride from here to, let's say Kansas.
Canada.
From here to Canada.
It was, I don't remember exactly. I think it was, I did 2,500 miles total before I came home. And I think from here to Canada was roughly 18 of that. And the Great Plains are pretty magical. A lot of us have probably ridden north of Tulsa in the Osage between here and Pawhuska. There's a lot of diversity there. And then of course you get into Kansas, you have the Flint Hills, and there's vastness. But you would think between here and Canada it's more of the same, right? Like we have our beauty here, it gets a little different and a little more beautiful in Kansas. But northern Kansas into Lincoln, Nebraska, there's this magical blue river, and you're riding on the terrain paralleling this river for about a day and a half. And some of it's rails to trails, and some of it's beautiful, like gravel, flat rolling hills with vistas next to a green belt. Completely change the scenery at coming at the perfect time because you're used to seeing the wide open vistas with the Flint Hills rolling. And like that was, you go through these geographical like segments of diverse nature that you wouldn't expect along a green belt. Then you get the wide open sections of Nebraska that lead you to the Black Forest Hills in South Dakota, which South Dakota, if you're wondering what the best state was on this trip, from start to finish, South Dakota is magnificent. I would go back there in a heartbeat, and then the section between north of Emporia into Lincoln, those two by far were my favorite two sections. And then, so you got the diversity of the river trail, like the river, then you got the diversity of the Black Forest Hill, which is this weird ass anomaly that comes out of the middle of nowhere. Nebraska, Stacy knows, is mostly flat with some canyons, has diversity, lots of farm, lots of cattle, big beautiful rivers that you're sometimes meandering in and out of. But you get to the Black Forest Hills, which are just past Pine Ridge where that big story happened, and you're all of a sudden in this 6,000 foot mountain that just rises as an anomaly, old formation out of the Great Plains. It's not part of the Rocky Mountains, it's its own thing. And there you have the Mickelson Trail, which is 200 miles of almost, I think it's 150, somewhere in there, miles of rails to trails in the forest along this old European settler, like town after town after town where the trains were to pull the resources out of that after they displaced the Native Americans. So all the development happened like 1880 to 1910. It's all like hardcore, like Calamity Jane, Wild Bill, saloon vibes everywhere. And you just roll 40 miles at a time along this train route into these old magnificent cities, towns, with just tons of culture. And I'd say that was probably the highlight of the trip when I texted my buddy Ethan. It's like, Ethan, I need you to pretend you're Calamity Jane, you just did some crazy shit, and you want to have a beer at a saloon. And Ethan works for like a musical museum, so he knows every music song out there. And he sends me Saloon Vibes, 50-song playlist, and I'm just lost in this world of like 1910, pretending I'm on horseback via the bike, or like moving through time and space, 10 miles per hour. And I'm getting to the next town at the end of the day, and it's like, damn, I just want a cold beer. Like, that was totally like feeling those vibes for 2 straight days. And when you're by yourself and you're done talking to the cattle, you gotta find things like that, for me at least, for entertainment. And you can really time travel if you let yourself just really daydream. You can just get in a zone and lose a whole concept of 2024, and like pretend you're in 1910, hanging out with Calamity Jane at the end of a mail run. That was part of her job. She ran mail for money.
So how much weight did you lose on the trip?
You would think a lot, right? I came home 8 pounds heavier than I left.
That's a good trip.
Isn't that wild? So like, I did lose body fat percentage, but I think when most of your day consists of sitting, and all of a sudden most of your day now is walking, hiking, building your back strap up, building your core, building your glutes, torquing, like literally torquing a bike up a mountain, like all this stuff thickens up, gets denser. I lost roughly 4% body fat, but came back 6 pounds heavier.
What was money like? Was it like you got donations? Did you save up money?
Yeah, bike packing, right? Like, we're in a place of where like you can spend a lot of money to get going, and that bike is my idea of a perfect bike. So I've been lucky enough to know this is what I wanted to commit resources to. So I did it in a way where if I needed something on the route, I could splurge on it. So for me, it's not that way for most. I was out there with people like, you know, a slice of pizza or two was going to stretch their budget. So like I had the luxury of fully fueling, not worrying about money. And to give you a sense, you know, if you're doing dollar per calorie, I would walk out of a store for a 1-day load, like 15 hours of riding, that's about $40. So like you're spending $40 a day on those calories. And for me, that was a lot of chocolate milk. It was the recovery Gatorades. That's what went in my 2.5 liter bladder. So every stop, the basics were 3 of those recovery Gatorades, 3 chocolate milks and or the Starbucks mochas, because they have, I think, 10 grams of protein each in them. And you're trying to figure out sneaky ways to get easy digestible protein into you while riding. So it's always 3 milks or three coffees, because coffee would also boost your energy. And I liked cold things, so the milk, the protein, 450 calories per milk. So each one of those bottles had at least 600 calories in them of milk. And then the weirdest things, like I didn't want a candy bar on this trip at all. Didn't buy a single candy bar. It was pastries. So we're talking like coffee cakes, we're talking like glazed stuff, anything that was sugary pastry, simple carbs, easy to move, and yeah, lots of sugar.
You mentioned the slouch tire, any other mechanicals, and then that's my greatest fear is stuff breaking in the middle of nowhere.
Yes.
How's your game with fixing stuff on the fly?
Highly recommend, out of personal experience, know every bolt on your bike. Caleb may hate this, but the first time I tried to learn every bolt on my bike, I watched my bike be built behind the counter. I asked the mechanic, like, build me extra time in, you know, give me dedicated time so you can show me every bolt on this bike. And then that still caught me out because we put a part on the bike, even though I knew the bolt was there. It's not this crank, but it was a 10 millimeter Allen on my bottom bracket. And all your tools, the standard is an 8. And I actually rode the end of a G3 ride, a local gravel race here, 20-something miles with one pedal, because I didn't know I needed a 10 millimeter crank bolt or Allen. There is a trick to that. You could take a 6 and a 4, put them side by side, and it turns into a 10. I didn't know that till after the fact. But this is my go-to tool. I can rebuild this bike with that tool.
What is it?
It's the Wolf Tooth. You can open it if you want to see it. It's a pretty affordable tool because it does everything. It's got a chain brake. It carries the spare chain link, and then inside it has all your Allen keys that go into the end of that, and then that moves. So because I needed to know every bolt on my bike, when I rebuilt this bike, I tore it down and rebuilt it completely with just this to make sure I could fix anything on the trail at any time, anywhere. I learned how to bleed my brakes. I learned how to do everything that way. I can service it and diagnose. Example, my brake caliper, started rubbing the rotor, like knowing how to loosen those and really finesse it, practice that at home, because first time I learned how to do it was on the trail. I was in the sun. I probably sweated out 3 liters of sweat trying to get that thing fixed. Just know your bike when it's easy. Don't learn your bike when it's hard, if that makes sense.
Did you run tubes in the tires?
No tubes. I know tubes are popular. There's so many ways, glass, the little thorns in the bushes, so many ways to get flats. And tubeless these days are so easy to change in the field. What I do is I carry a sewing kit, like heavy duty needles. I can sew the sidewall. I can patch it. I carry the full size car plugs. I don't know if you've seen those tar plugs, kind of like a bacon strip you use on regular road tubeless. but they're as big as your pinky. Like one of those things, jab it in there. That's how I got back to Valentine, Nebraska. I was 1 mile from town, I got a flat. Without that, it would have been really hard to fix. So slam that giant plug in. And to get back to the question, the worst thing I had on this trip was, in here it's wireless shifting, and there's a battery here and a battery here, the watch batteries, the little round ones. And then there's only one battery on this bike in addition to that right here. So I was coming off Coco Claims, that 4-hour hike. It was the next morning. I just slept next to a snowbank. I was super cold. Hiked down some of it until I got past the snowpack, and it was real violent, but I was starting to pick up speed, and I'm trying to shift. Nothing. I'm like, oh, that's weird. I try to shift out of the other side. I'm like, oh, that's weird. So like, it's got to be the back battery, right? You're not gonna have two dead batteries in the front at the same time. So I'm fiddling around with it, change it out. It shifts once or twice. I'm banging, and it stops again. Whoa, that's really weird. So now I'm paranoid because like the year before, a couple of riders using that exact same setup had to single speed it in for hundreds of miles. And I was several hundred miles from the next bike shop. So I was getting a little nervous. I take the battery off. I polish the connectors like a little small rock, put it back on, and nothing. So finally I realized I slept in such a cold environment, and I had ridden to Canada. I didn't change this before I started coming back south. And the second day of the Tour Divide, both of these must have gotten so cold they just crapped out simultaneously, which seems statistically weird that that would happen, that both would quit shifting. So I'm frozen, I've been descending, and like the sun's coming, like it's probably an hour after sunrise, but you're still kind of cold. And you really got to dig into this sucker to get all the way down here to that battery. And I'm doing it leaning next to a tree on the side of a real steep mountain, and like there's grass and stuff up to my knees, deadfall, and just fiddling with battery for an hour, and then do both of them, on the way I go. That was the most troubleshooting, I guess, the whole trip. And I think that just goes to knowing the bike. Like other stuff happened, but you get comfortable, you just kind of do it and forget about it. What broke though on the whole trip, I had a ceramic speed bottom bracket, ceramic bearings, gone. They're warranting that. The guy, I talked to the main guy at the factory, he's like, absolutely good for the Tour Divide. Nope. Had to replace those in Montana. The rear hub, both hub bearings got to where they were so seized up, the rear tire was just spinning on the axle. The bearings themselves were so tight. I guess there's dust caps on the end of these. It had rubbed the paint off the axle. That's how much it was just rubbing as the whole assembly was spinning. And like I would do the wheel test, like is my bike working properly? It would just, you'd flick it like it would spin for 10, 15 seconds, instantly stop. So I rode roughly 200 miles with that friction. And then the problem with this bike, I didn't know, DT Swiss, the hub is new, EXP if you're familiar, just came out like 4 years ago, I think. The bike shops in Montana did not have the tool to take apart the new DT Swiss hub. So I only got one bearing and had to ride with that busted bearing until I decided to come home. So yeah, try to build a bike with common parts is the other key. So when you get to a shop anywhere in the middle of Oklahoma, you're on the city cycles, the parts are on the shelf.
Carry the tool with you.
Yeah, and that's like packing your fears, right? So another thing I had was a few years ago, what's the nut on the bottom of your cassette, the castle nut or whatever it's called? It holds the cassette on down here. It's like a specialty tool. So like I had to ride with my pedal off one time, I didn't have that tool on my bike. Now I carry that because luckily Star and her husband something along just ascended this giant descent. My back tire starts auto-locking up, and that castle nut had backed off so hard it was wedging the cassette and everything into the space here and seizing the back tire up. So I'm like, I can't fix this. There's no way. It's a specialty tool. And I pulled all apart, had my bike in pieces. Like taking that apart back there is hard, like your bags are everywhere. And have the tire off, and finally figure out that thing's backed out. And so I'm just standing on the side of a gravel road next to a river like, I'm done, I gotta call a ride. And I see this white truck coming by, and it looked pretty beat up, and I was like, maybe this is like a rancher. So I'm like, hey, 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 like holding my wheel up in the air, like, hey. The windows were down. It was actually a nice morning. And Star's like, what's going on? She's like, I got this real accent, heavy. I was like, you got a crescent wrench? She's like, where'd you come from? She didn't answer my question. She just wanted to know what the hell's going on. Like, why is this guy in my house, like, on my road next to my river? And she's like, you come from up there? There's bears up there. I'm like, I'm in Arkansas. I didn't know there was bears in Arkansas, but apparently there is. So I was like, yeah. I look across, he's driving. I'm like, you got a crescent wrench? She's just like looking at my bike. Like, she's halfway out the window looking back at my bike, just so curious. And he's like, yeah, he's like nothing to him. He just reaches over in the middle of his console, grabs a crescent wrench. I'm like, fuck, like, yes. Like, I really wanted to finish this ride. I was only a day away. So yeah, you can bite, apparently, on the different cassette I had on here. It wasn't this one. I since abandoned that cassette because it's a known issue that this happens. It's one of those fancy ones that claim they're awesome but will bite you in the ass. So OEM cassette now, but on the other one, I could grab that castle nut from the outside, just squeeze the heck out of it and get it to tighten back up. And that's just luck of the draw that they came by. You know, had I not chose to sleep at the top of that hill, I would have already been past there, back into the deep woods. It just happened to be the perfect place at the perfect time where that thing broke. So, yeah. I guess that's the lessons learned is, again, don't go exotic. Do OEM so that you know you can get parts and they're bulletproof tested, because OEM isn't going to do something that fails as often as the exotic stuff.
We've done several little small trips, and when it's over, it seems kind of difficult for me to just go back to work. Or just kind of transition back to I don't know, I want to be back where I was. What was the transition for you after being on the road for so long? Was it easy? Or?
There were phases of transition, actually. Like, it starts on the front side of that. Like, on a trip, I would say past like normal vacation time frame, like a week, maybe 10 days. I noticed when I did the Osage 9 Ball, which is a 900-mile loop, it took me 11 days, and I transitioned away from that. So like, you're used to your routine, you're used to your family, you're used to your comfort zones, you're used to your favorite food, your bedtime routine, and that really takes the same thing, takes time to get out of that mode and start accepting the new, right? The new routine. You get past the homesickness, and then it becomes normal to be out there. Coming home was excitement, if that makes sense. Like, if you were asking me what I missed the most, it was this. It was eye to eye, something looking back at me and being intelligent, conversations. It was, you wouldn't believe human touch. Like, you see all those people on TV, like, can I give you a free hug? Free hugs, they're holding the signs up. I didn't realize when I saw that years ago on TV how emotionally strengthening another embrace is. So I transitioned away from normal, I transitioned into homesickness, and then I transitioned into the desire of wanting to go home, and then I transitioned into comfort. I got used to that feeling of being alone and isolated and by myself. So when I came home, getting back into the routine was actually something as I desired as much as I did desiring to leave the routine. Does that make sense? Like, the heart desires, I guess, what it doesn't have. And how do I know what I miss if it's always there? I think if you explore yourself for prolonged periods of time outside your normal element, the things that you come back to, you want there. I think I mentioned to Tiffany is like, what is my identity? Like, what is my purpose? What is my mission? What is my desire? That's what I'm thinking about right now, because I'm lucky to be self-employed and we're in between projects. Now that I don't have this mission of training, something that's consuming my mind every moment of the day, planning, thinking, doing, expanding, you're focused on something, you have a purpose. I think I asked Tiffany just a few nights ago, when's my next project? Like when we're kicking off our next phase of construction? When are we expanding the business? And that's coming, I think, from the base of your question is how do you integrate back once you don't have a purpose? So I don't have a necessary normal routine, so I may not relate as much with that question because my days are so varied. But I think what I'm struggling with now is like, what's the next adventure? What's the next goal? What's the next journey? Whether it's building a new building or if we don't make a decision quick on the next building, I'll be planning the next adventure. So like, have a purpose, I guess, is what I'm struggling with. Yeah. I think it's a real thing.
Moving back to a car. He's like, you're driving way too fast. We're going to 60.
It's traveling the country by bike. It's so cool because I rode here from Sand Springs. I was like, everywhere you look, people are just in something else that moves them along. And the concept of human motion, human power, human energy, like only in this room probably can we relate to moving with ourselves, powered by humans. So like going across the country over 2 months and moving at 10 miles per hour, you could do that in an airplane in a 6-hour flight. It would take me 12 hours to go 100 miles. You can do that in a car in an hour and a half. So like the concept of time and space and motion, it completely is warped in our day-to-days, and it comes back to a human scale of output when you do a trip like this, because that's how all of our ancestors have moved. It was only 150 years ago we started having locomotion. Like we used to move as fast as a horse. What is that, 20 miles an hour sustained? Like the furthest town you could get to in a day was 40 miles away. So like when I came home and I got in a car and I drove myself home too, so I had time to acclimate. But that sensation of speed, to me, it was so unnatural. It was just like, I can't process this movement. You're going 65 miles down a highway and the grass is going past you at 65 miles an hour, whereas you were seeing it at 10, maybe 15 at most. So like that is a transition for sure, just motion. Yeah. I think it's special, like if you have the time to get out there and like, you're out there long enough to really warp your perception back to what our ancestors did, like it's really cool. It's a really cool way to explore yourself because distance is only your capacity. It's not time, it's your capacity as a human, your output. So like, what are we capable of is not measured in time, it's measured in your calories and how can you burn them efficiently and get as far as you possibly can before you have to refuel, which is sleep. And like, there's another story there. You never know how far you can go until you've gone too far, and that's literally pushing yourself until you pass out from mental overload. So there is a limit to our capacity, and if you can find that, that's a very rare luxury to know that about yourself. It's very hard to get to. There's not many sports that are set up that. Baseball game, you're not going to pass out from exhaustion. You might cramp, but it takes 5, 6, for me 8 days. Well, it was day 5. At day 5, I passed out from exhaustion. Not on this trip, on the previous, I did a race across Texas, mile 800. We were going for the fastest known time, meeting another guy, we were racing. I had done the Lau Wilcox idea, 20 hours, 4 hours of sleep. I'd done that 3 days in a row. And I told the race director, this is a safe course to play with sleep deprivation on because it's roughly 40 miles from each town. So at no time are you more than 20 miles in one direction from Savior, right? You get yourself in trouble, there's someone going to bail you out within, if they leave immediately, 30 minutes. So I told the director, it's Spinistry, the guy down there, I was like, I'm going to play with some deprivation. So day 4 hit, and the guy was about 30 miles ahead of me. And the sun came up. I hadn't went to sleep yet, so I was roughly 24 hours in. And I get to roughly hour 30. And 4 hours previous to that, I was going through some ruts in the canyons in West Texas. And I'd go roughly 4 miles and not perceive that distance on my odometer. And what would wake me up as I'm riding my bike is I'd bounce off ruts. And it would startle me enough, like jerk my handlebars, and be like, oh, how far did I get? And I'm like, okay, I'm pretty tired. I'm starting to do that, zombie sleep on the bike. I hear Lyle Wilcox and other fast people talk about it on their podcasts. Had some hallucinations previous, like seeing things that aren't there and seeing ghosts, something white on the side of the road. You'll think it's like the Punisher mask and stuff like that. And it gets real hot that afternoon, and I'm looking for a tree. I'm like, I need a tree. We're in West Texas. There's no trees. You're in canyon country. And I see a tree down the bottom of the hill. I'm like, I'll get the next one. I'm not going down that hill. That's too much energy to spend, get out. I go about 5 more miles, well into the pain cave, well into exhaustion. Probably was dehydrated, definitely was behind on calories because you've been going 30 hours. You can only eat 300 calories an hour, but you're burning 500 to 600 calories an hour. So you've not refueled anything, so your climate system in your body is just whacked out. It gets extremely hot, you stop moving, it gets extremely cold. It's just polar as it can be. Chemicals are out of balance, and just everything's jacked. Your mind's like, keep going, I gotta catch this guy. And about 2 hours earlier, I texted my buddy Eric, and I was like, this guy's fucking strong. I was digging hard to catch him, because I caught him that morning, my battery died. He got a lead on me again when I was fiddling with it in my deprived state. Couldn't find the battery. Put your stuff in the same spot every time. Couldn't find the battery. And I'm trying to catch him. And I'm looking at my power meter. It's reading 300. Like, anyone who knows power, that's pretty beefy at the end of a 30-hour day. And I'm digging. And all of a sudden, I wake up on a gravel road. Don't know how I got there. I'm not wearing any clothes. Sitting on my chamois. And I'm just like this. Just, what? So literally, I find out after the fact, people on Mount Everest die naked. They take their clothes off because their body is no longer thermoregulating. They think they're hot when it's actually cold. It was 40-something degrees where I was. It was not hot. The sun was out, but it was not hot by any means. So I got naked, took everything off me. I guess it's some reflex chemically that your brain does to shut you down. And apparently that is the limits of exhaustion. When you just subconsciously shut down. I don't know how I got on the ground. I didn't crash. I wasn't hurt, no blood, no scratches, no scrapes. Bike was just laid over. I'm sitting on my chamois naked. And I come to. And then I'm like standing up. I think about walking back to the cell phone building, which I know is abandoned. There's nothing there. The town that way is really far away, and the town in front of me is only 7 miles. We all ride 7 miles. Probably everyone in here has ridden 7 miles. The idea of going 7 miles would might have been 7,000. There's no way I was getting back on that bike mentally. I couldn't do it. So I start walking without my bike, going back to the other cell phone tower, which would have been absolutely useless. It's a complete wrong decision. I start coming back to my bike, and I just sit down, and then I wake up again, the sun's setting. I don't know how long I slept. Now I'm awake again, the sun's setting. And I'm standing there like this, just looking off in the distance, and I just scream, "Is this hell?" I was so helpless and just so out of my mind and functioning like a toddler. I had food on the bike, I had salt on the bike, I had water on the bike, I was cold, I had my emergency bivvy on the bike. I couldn't bring myself to think to use any of those resources to recover. So I then fall asleep again. I have clothes on now. I got in the shelter, and then I wake up at 2 in the morning. It's not that cold, and I've got clothes, I've got coats, I've got pants. I don't put any of that on. Didn't have cell phone reception this whole time. I hid my cell phone from myself because I knew that was my subconscious way of getting out of this situation. So subconsciously, I hid my cell phone from myself. Didn't know where it was. Woke up cold. Somehow a text comes through. Tiffany, I guess, had been trying to get a hold of me. I'd been trying to get a hold of her. Nothing. I had the GPS. I could have used it. I didn't. Could have texted her. And I'm like, I get a text out. I say, I'm cold. Call the sheriff. Have them pick me up. This is 2 in the morning in the middle of nowhere. So they end up coming to get me at 4. He said, what are you doing out here? I was like, man, I'm just cold. Couldn't make it to town. It's 7 miles away. I could have ate food hours ago and been there hours ago. So that's me finding my limits. I think I would never want to do that again, but you never know how far you can go until you've gone too far. Luckily, I came out of that. Like, It wasn't cold enough to kill me. I could have died on Mount Everest, probably in that sleep-deprived state, but I just woke up shivering and texting and could have put clothes on and didn't because I was functioning like a toddler. Like, mommy telling me to get dressed. Like, I needed my mommy there to tell me to put clothes on and eat. And the lesson of that is if any of you get to that point where you're bouncing around, you're waking up because something jostles you, you got about 4 hours left before you pass out. And that's what I used out as my threshold, is unconscious movement of time. If that starts happening, take a 2-hour nap and you'll be fine. It doesn't take much sleep, it's just do a little bit of it. I got there at Doom this spring. I wanted to test it again to make sure I could come out of it. So she didn't know, but I was intentionally sleep depriving again. Did that same 30-hour stint at the end of day 3. Me and a buddy, Dave Easley, were doing it together, so we had each other to help each other. We both got to the point almost at the exact same time, and for both of us, it happened around hour 30 after 2 hard days. We literally I grabbed my puffy coat, I grabbed my rain pants, we slept in the ditch 2 hours, ate a can of chicken noodle soup, cold, when I woke up, and off we went to finish the race 12 hours later. So when you don't perceive time, that's when it's time to break, for sure. But yeah, those are fun for me. Like, everyone's got like a long face, like, holy cow, like, what's going on? Like, find your limit. It doesn't have to be that extreme, but find your limit. How far can you go? I encourage that with all my heart. Like, that's what's exciting in so many ways. The bike packing aspect that I did on this trip, where I was just going and enjoying time, that is also incredibly enjoyable. So it's polar for me. I like to either go really slow and take everything in, look at history, or I like to run myself into the ground literally. So you're loaded, Bobby. Yeah.
Unless anybody else got anybody, am I interrupting anybody with their? Okay, no. I read the last post you had when you put it out there, and it's really deep. I immediately thought you should submit that to this book that's called something, it's called something Cordillera.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just all these stories, all like, well, not all, the people, basically people finding their limits in there. And I was just wondering, at the time you wrote it, you looked like you had found what you'd like to do and time-wise, but since time has passed, are you having different thoughts? Are you now thinking, or is it going to take years, or you're dead set on 4 to 5 days is good, I don't need to go back to the Tour Divide, and if I do, it'll be in bites. I've often thought it's kind of a weird oxymoron, bike pack racing, because everything you talked about tonight was beautiful,
Mhm.
and stuff that you see and experience. And riding through night can be fun, but in the woods I just feel like is a scary experience and negates from that. And I see if you have like a 3-day race, if you need some guys just ride on through, and it's a real race. You can call it a bike pack race. If you need to take a nap, or whatever it is, however you want to do it. But obviously you cannot ride the Tour Divide in one shot. You feel that you're wasting time racing it, or I shouldn't say time, wasting opportunities for like what you can see and experience. How do you feel about the whole idea of bike pack racing?
I think there are, if
Camping would be weird.
what's that?
Speed camping would be weird.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
So it's similar in some ways.
It's-
to what your question.
I think it's 2 complete different forms of a subculture of bike packing or bike riding, which is bike pack racing and bike pack touring. And I had the luxury of trying to do those back to back. I wanted to tour to Canada to the start of the Tour Divide and then race to Mexico. And I had never truly embraced the idea of ever doing the Tour Divide slow. I wanted to race it. That was my full intent. And I had done the Osage 9 ball and done it the way you described, which is seeing nature, seeing yourself, and letting your desire dictate your distance, where you stop, how you embrace, how you interact. If a flower gets your attention and you want to take a picture of it, grab those breaks and spend 5 minutes with that flower in that scene and eat your candy bar. That's bike pack touring. And for me, I completely fall in love. You've probably seen all the buildings on here. With going through time as if I was living in that time period of the structures I'm seeing. I imagine on the red brick roads still being horse and carriage. Like, I am truly embracing my environment. And then if I do both. If I backpack race like at Ozark Gravel Dune, that's a 4-day race. I'm going until I pass out, right? Like, I'm not going to stop at that flower. I'm not going to spend extra time at the Orc Cafe and look at the art and the history there. I'm going to like find and embrace my internal flower of desire and my ability to push through emotional and mental blocks of physicality. So to me, they're both just as rewarding. What caught me off guard at the beginning of the Tour Divide, directly after riding a full month getting to Canada, was how polar those two things are side by side. I think that's where I got really discouraged, is I just went through this whole mindset of slow, enjoy, embrace the beauty and the environment, and then I had the quick 180 2 weeks later of hammer, 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 go, 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 and then I'm around people who had goals and desires. They wanted to go fast. They should have been in this town 2 days earlier. And everyone's like, my grandma just died. Like, I'm not going to make it. I got to go home and tell them I'm not going to make it. I can't finish. Like, this is too hard. That totally killed the vibe for me because I didn't have enough time to switch in the race mode. I was still in tour mode. I think the other thing is taking those 2 weeks off, my body and mind had time to digest the physicality and the mentality drain that I had just enjoying the tour for a month. So I didn't have time to regain the capacity physically and mentally that it takes to race a Tour Divide. So I guess what I've learned from both of that is, since I've been home and I've had roughly 5 weeks to think about it, is the post I wrote said that I wanted to go to the Tour Divide. I wanted to see if I could do it. And there may just be some things in life that are bigger than me. That if I try it again and I don't finish it, I don't know if I can ever finish it. And that was how I felt when I stopped. And I've had time to reflect, especially on the physicality part. When I stopped, I was 800 miles in. I had beaten the weather. I had got there 2 days faster than I did the year before. I was not sleep deprived. I was not depleted physically. I could walk to the bathroom. I could go to Taco Bell. Like, all the measuring sticks that I had were there. I could have kept going. I had a 28-day goal. That's considered race pace. 28 days or less is race pace. Roughly 100 miles a day, 10,000 feet of climbing a day. And I was on that pace. But I'd got through all of those physical barriers. I did it. I defeated the version of myself that got whooped 2 years earlier. There was this weird sense of accomplishment and peace that I had when I got to the same town. I stayed in the exact same hotel that I had quit the 2 years before and had a taxi to the airport. Like, I recreated it so I could wash those memories completely out of my brain and say I won. And up until that point, I did. I did everything I needed to do to defeat my 2-year-old self and win that internal race. And then I was resting there that night, and I was like, desire for me is a big thing in life. Kind of one of our life things is, if you're not happy or you're not in a place of desire, change. Find what motivates you. I just had no desire left to continue. Somehow I felt content with getting back there and defeating my 2-year-old self. And I heard someone say, and this is probably what started the negative mindset about not wanting to continue. 2 days earlier, a guy said, I've been riding for 3 days and I hadn't seen anything new. And then I thought about that for a while, and I was actually feeling the same way. I'm in the most beautiful part of the country. I should be ecstatic to be here. If I was fresh and I just got there, this is the most beautiful thing I want to keep seeing day after day after day. And somehow I got to a point where that wasn't the case. And then I was like, I am disrespecting this environment. I should be here when I am enjoying it. It's too pretty. I'm too privileged. It's too privileged of a place to be. It deserves my respect, and I wasn't giving it that. So that was a lot of internal fight. The reaction I got from Tiffany, it caught her off guard because I was doing so good. The public perception everyone probably had on my Instagram was I was doing good. That literally hit. That change, that snap change happened in a day when I heard that comment and I pondered on it. So I think a lesson from that is if you're on a day trip, a 3-day trip, a 5-day trip, let your desire motivate you. And if it doesn't, what is the point of being in a race and droning through the night, not seeing anything? And if you're not the type of person that wants to find your physicality, if you're not the type of person that wants to find your mental limits, there's no reason to do that. Bikepack racing is silly. It's silly in the sense if that's not what you desire, don't do it. So I would say I do both. Like I'm already jonesing for the Osage 300. That's 300 miles. I won the race the first year. I quit the race last year at mile 200. I want to go murder myself for 24 hours. It's a 24-hour race for me. Like, I'm not going to stop and look at a single thing. I won't look at the buildings in Pasca. I'm just going to rip through it as fast as I can. And sometimes that's what I crave. And on the tour, I think I learned that I also crave going slow. Like 10 miles per hour is cool. It's really cool, actually. And I think it becomes acceptable when we don't look at Strava, we don't look at the people winning Ozark Gravel Dune, we don't look at Lael Wilcox. We may be on the same course, but find your desires and find that desire within a day. When you get tired, just stop. Like, that's touring. Like, you don't want to camp that night? Grab a hotel if you can afford it. Like, credit card camp these things. It doesn't have to be hardcore in a tent under the stars. So, like, find you and find your desire, what motivates. I don't think there's a right answer. I think it could be both, for sure. I think I am both.
That's cool that you got the perspective to actually answer the question from going back to back and seeing the transition.
Yeah, it was a very abrupt change. I wouldn't recommend stopping. So I think allowing myself to let my mental and physical guard down, if you know what I mean. Like, I stayed in this really cool town, this border town, Fortuna. It was in a old high school, like I guess it was all grades, in the middle of farm country, three or four churches in this town and like 5 other businesses. So like you're in God's country out here. And this this school somehow went out of business. I don't know where they go to school now. I guess they're all homeschooled, or they're just not there, I guess. It's an ag town taken over by corporate ag. And this really big 15, 20,000 foot school is now the teacher's lounge and the something hotel, all under one building. So you go in here, you got a bar, you got darts, you got casinos, you got pool table, and then right behind 2 doors, you got a hotel room. I was like, I'm in this border town, this thing's $40 a night, and I can get full menu cooked for me while having a beer served. I stayed there for a week to recover. I needed 2 weeks of recovery, right? So I'm like, $40 a night, I can eat dinner for $10, literally, have pizza, quesadillas, prime rib sandwiches, whatever. It was a really cool environment. But letting my guard down there, just laying up in the sack, recovering, watching TV, the adventure's on pause. I think I shut down both ways, mentally and physically, and didn't have enough time to get that built up energy back. So I would have kept it going, I think, if I did it all over again.
I saw the pictures you had, you went on like encounters, but is there any like scary ones? Did you see something where you like you see people or hear people talking about their fear of going through Montana and grizzly bears at that time? I've seen over the years people that attacked.
Yeah, the 2 post office stays I've had, some of you probably know this, you can legally sleep in a post office. So you roll through these towns and you see an old post office, they're unlocked for the post office lock boxes 24 hours a day. And since it's a public space, you can technically sleep in there. So 2 years ago when I did Tour Divide, the year before, a woman was killed in her tent right by this post office town I'm mentioning, and it was actually still in Canada right before you got to Montana. And it was cold that night. I was going to sleep on the backside of the mountain, so it was going to be a really cold descent. Didn't really want to do that anyway. And on the climb up, I saw my first bear encounter. And it was super chill, it was uneventful, but still, it's a bear, right? Like, we're from Oklahoma. You hear these stories. And I knew about that lady being killed. Since then, I found out the bear itself had been run over, it was wounded, it was hungry, it was about to die from its damage of being hit by a vehicle, so it was not doing normal things. I guess apparently they're not normally aggressive to humans. And she had food and deodorant in her tent. That's just, Andrew got on to me one time because he saw a picture with my bike this far from my tent. He's like, bro, that's too close. That's bear bait, like, get it out of here. So I did that in a sleep deprived, like, I just need to get in a cold state, and I shouldn't have done that. And for whatever reason, she had food in her tent, and the bear came and she sprayed the bear spray. But they're territorial. You got to pack up and leave if you encounter a bear like that. The bear spray spooks them off, and sometimes the scent may attract more bears or the same bear. So scare them off, it's a deterrent, get out of there. She goes back to bed, it comes back and defends its territory and tries to get at her stuff. So I didn't know that at the time, I thought it was just a rogue bear going to eat me. The one I saw was on the road. I was from here maybe to that exit sign. I stop, it's at dusk, it sees me, I see it, we're looking at each other, and I just do like that, and it's up the hill. A few seconds later, down the hill. I guess running uphill sucks, right? So back down the hill, and I wait, I take a picture as it's doing its thing, and you're like, you were sleepy, you were tired, now you're jetted up, you're energized, you're holding, I don't know if I showed you guys this. This thing's really clever. All you gotta do is, like, in the bottle itself, it's ready to go. You pop this off, that's your safety. There's a lot of dirt in there, and now you can do your thing from here to Andrew. Andrew's, I think, fired it before. Anyway, I had it in my hand, I had it in my pocket the rest of that trip through that whole region. Like, it was no longer on my bike, it was in my back jersey pocket. Like, I changed my shirt, I got like a regular cycling jersey for when it's really windy. You don't want this thing like bruising your side and it's flapping. So I had it in my cycling jersey and off I went. And I think most bear encounters, you hear people on the tour all the time like, oh, did you see that grizzly? And if you're a mid-pack rider like me, there's been 50 people go before you. There may have been bear encounters every 5 minutes for the lead pack, but they're spooked off and off the road by the time I get there. So the worst thing was, dogs, we all encounter them. Don't let dogs deter you. The best piece of advice I got about dogs is, you are big. Humans are powerful. Dogs pretend they're big and powerful. They're puffering up too, so we got to puffer back. Aim your bike at the dog and roar. Every time I do that, that dog runs off like a scared puppy. So be just as big and puffy as they're being big and puffy, and get up in their chili and aim that front tire as if you're going to stroke it right between its eyes, and they will go away. So I didn't get to do that with this German Shepherd. So I was leaving the res. The res is full of a lot of stories. And it's chained up dog after chained up dog after chained up dog, and I'm not trying to draw any attention to myself. I've got my light at the lowest setting, my headlight's not on, because as soon as I turn my head like this, I'm shining it in windows 11 o'clock at night, where it's the highest murder rate in the whole region. I'm not shining lights in no one's house at this point. This dog just comes up out of the ditch. It's a German Shepherd. My bike can only go 22. It's geared for climbing. I can't outrun a German Shepherd. So scared for humans, I was willing to take a German Shepherd bike to the ankle because of the environment I was in. But again, dogs, if I could have roared at that German Shepherd, I could have gotten away. So that was the scariest animal encounter. The most unique was the bobcats. Cowboy Trail in Nebraska, lots of deer. I guess they eat the corn, right? Corn-fed deer. There was remains of deer all along the trail. Like, what is killing these deer? Like, they're pulled apart, and there's just bones, bobcats. And apparently they, like a screaming, high-pitched juvenile woman, right? Like, they holler at each other when they're communicating. So I didn't know that. I'm riding through Nebraska, and I guess they were saying I'm coming to each other. I get to a hotel, yeah, it was the girl at Valentine. And she owns a ranch, and they're getting out of her cows. And she's like, yeah, they talk to each other. You hear them screaming. I had my music on. I thought it was some weird lyric in the song. Well, no, it's these things hollering at each other. So that, I didn't see one, but they were there. And that hollering was really weird. So when you hear weird people screaming, like maybe don't go look at the bush. It's not a kid asking for help. It's like these things hollering at each other.
Right on, guys. So
Well, if you got some like wrap-up statements, we'll give it a go. But I really appreciate you doing this. It's been awesome. So thank you so much for coming out. So yeah, if you have like some final thoughts or to leave us with, that'd be awesome.
I didn't get to ask. One of my questions was, I wanted to go around the horn and like, what's driving you? Why are you here? There's a lot of curiosity. Like, we might not have enough time to do that tonight, but I really hope, from my experiences, just looking at me, seeing me, I'm a local guy that rides a bike a lot, eat what I want, drink a lot of beer, pizza. Like, you don't have to be that low cost. You don't have to have legs as big as like sprinters in the Tour de France. Like, find you and your capacity. And for me, that's taking expectations off the tail end of it. If you want to go do Osage 300, don't set a distance or a time call. Just go see how far you get. If you want to arrive from here in Nebraska, just start it. If you only have 5 days, don't be discouraged if you only do 400 out of 800. It's the process, it's the journey, it's the self-discovery along the way that lasts forever. It's not how fast you go. It's not who you impress on Strava. It's not the expectations you see on the great documentaries. It's what you desire. And just go do it. Just go. Like, I had no business starting that ride. I didn't even know the route. I didn't know I was going to go into Native American territory. Probably shouldn't have been there. Had I not though, none of us would be here. Like, just go. Just do. And I would like to thank you guys. I think I started this conversation about envy, and I think what City Cycles is doing here is going to be the envy of a lot of other groups, a lot of other cyclists, a lot of other towns. Bikepacking is great as a group. It's great for our city. It's great for us as individuals. Like, when we ride next time to Osage State Park, or wherever we're going this fall, like, that's what it's all about. It's the camaraderie, finding yourself, helping others along their journey along the way. Like, it's a really special way to interact with the world. And I hope that any preconceived expectations, just forget them and show up. And you will leave there so much more enriched and a much more powerful person because of it. The ordinary becomes easy and the hard becomes ordinary. You show up. It really does. So, thank you guys for listening. Way out, if you want to quickly pick over the bike, see any tips and tricks, I'd be willing to like.
appreciate it, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.